Morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Marcus Beer. I'm the Strategic Partner Manager here at Chorus. Today's session is going to focus on adopting a modern zero trust approach to security and how we deliver extended detection and response services by leveraging the Microsoft Security Toolset. Just to run through the agenda and introduce our speakers. We're excited to welcome Ali Turnbull, who is a Microsoft Cloud Solutions Architect and will be taking us through Microsoft Security Strategy. Following Ali, our very own Head of Cybersecurity, Mark Jones, will be outlining how we build a roadmap to adopt Zero Trust, as well as going through our managed security services in more detail. There is a chat box available for questions, and we do have some time at the end for Q&A. But before we get into the main session, I'd just like to provide a quick introduction to Chorus. If you just go on the next slide, please. Perfect. So we are a transformative managed security services provider, which means we have extensive experience and expertise throughout our practice areas to implement and encourage technical change across Azure, Microsoft 365 and Dynamics 365, as well as having the internal capability to support our clients' environments. Since 2004, we've been an expanding gold partner with a wide variety of competencies, along with a real focus on security, where we've been awarded 3 advanced specialisms in threat protection, information protection, and identity and access management, which allows us to deliver a 24/7 cybersecurity operations centre that's underpinned by Microsoft security tooling and as a service that's entirely based in the UK. Our CSOC, which Mark will go through shortly, has also been verified directly with Microsoft. So if you join this webinar, then I'm sure you're already aware that security is a vitally important area of focus. However, we'd like to share a couple of statistics just to set the scene. First of all, it's documented that 70% of breaches start on the endpoints, the majority of which are essentially your end users. Of those breaches, basic security hygiene, such as deploying multi-factor authentication, basic user education, endpoint protection and patching, can prevent 98% of these breaches from occurring. However, should someone successfully get into your environment, they're there for an average of 187 days. That's essentially 6 months before being detected. But once identified, should it be contained within 30 days, you'll save on average £720,000. Due to this, around 50% of all organisations will be using MDR services by 2025. But enough from me. I'd like to hand over to Ali, who's going to take us through Microsoft Security Strategy.
Thanks very much, Marcus. So cybersecurity is on everyone's minds. Organisations cannot afford to ignore it. So no matter what size your organisation is, getting it wrong is existing or threat. Based on what's going on in the Ukraine and Russia at the moment, the National Cybersecurity Centre has issued some advice for people to prepare for further attacks from Russia. Attacks are getting more varied and interesting. Whether or not it's the largest DDoS attack that we withstood last year, or attempts to pivot from identity to network or whatever, it pretty much is really a battleground now. Scarily, the average price of cybercrime services for sale, you can buy 1,000 verified usernames and passwords for less than $1. So there's so much that we kind of really need to do in order to be able to look after the environment and how do we protect that. And it's so cheap, which is absolutely crazy. Nation state actors, they've become so much more sophisticated and harder to detect. So creating a threat to security that is replicated by other cybersecurity criminals. But the major point here is that many lessons can be learned. Firstly, a continuing threat vector is still email compromise. In fact, phishing is still responsible for 70% of those data breaches. Secondly, cyber criminals are using malware that is posed as legitimate software update to target unsuspecting employees. Thirdly, ransomware attacks, they've still raised the stakes to focus not only on double or triple extortion tactics in terms of payout, but they're also offering ransomware as a service, which is when a partner network is used to carry out that attack, and making that really tough to determine who the real bad actor is. And finally, the adversaries are targeting on-premise systems, reinforcing the need for organizations to move into infrastructure to the cloud, where security is more difficult to penetrate. Moving on to the next slide, just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about trust. So this is a quote from Satya Nadella, who is our CEO at Microsoft. And the quote really kind of goes through and kind of talks about businesses as users are going to only embrace technology only if they can trust it. And that's not a new quote. It's been around for a long time, but it's more relevant than ever right now. And I think it's a huge differentiator from Microsoft. People do trust us. According to CEO Magazine, Microsoft is the only software company listed in the top 10 of trusted brands, and we've been there for 8 years. Microsoft is also the fourth in the world of the most valued brands too. The difference is people trust us. So let's see how that kind of looks, in terms of what we actually do. It may surprise you to know that Microsoft is one of the largest security vendors in the world. We help to secure 650,000 organizations, and countless end users rely on our services every day. And we take that responsibility really seriously. We proudly talked about 6.5 trillion signals a couple of years ago. Now we're talking about 24 trillion. That's a day. Other security businesses are getting about 1 trillion signals a month. So that scale is shocking and it's unignorable. Being in the trenches for a high number of high-profile recent attacks has also helped us to use the experience to collectively evaluate our defenses for the benefit of our customers. Today, we track more than 70 active nation-state actors and over 140 threat groups representing 20 countries. And then finally, blocking 32 billion emails. That's 4 for every person on the planet, which, to be frank, is pretty shocking. Our broad Microsoft ecosystem, from Azure to Dynamics 365 to Xbox to live logons, gives us a wide variety of the security landscape, and you can really see our signals at work. And I think coupled on top of that really is Microsoft investment. In 2017, we said that we're going to invest $1 billion annually towards building security into our core platforms. And last year, we said that we're going to quadruple that cybersecurity investment to $20 billion over the next 5 years. And that really can't be ignored. And that's kind of why people, are trusting us, because we're putting that effort into our products. So let's talk a little bit about Zero Trust. Zero Trust is a set of security principles. And the first principle it defines is verify explicitly. Always authenticate and authorize based on all available data points, including your user identity, your location, device health, data classification, and any anomalies. We also want to verify continuously, not only during the initial login, but frequently during the user's session, every single time that identity token gets refreshed and any time that secure posture has changed. The second is use least privileged access. Always adopt a least privileged approach. So just because I'm inside the corporate network does not mean that I can get to everything. I should only be allowed to get to a small number of apps that I need to get to do my work. We don't want to give users free access. And for very sensitive resources, we want to make sure that we use multi-factor authentication and make sure that the user is on a well-managed secure device and that you know that is in good shape before you allow access to your privileged resources. And lastly, we have to always assume breach. As good as our security is, we've got to assume that eventually an attacker will get in. And you need to have multiple layers of defense, and you need to have great monitoring and remediation in place so that you can quickly verify what's going on and take action. So the idea here is to minimize that blast radius by employing security strategies to prevent that lateral movement. Those are the pillars of our Zero Trust strategy. But where to start? Well, this cybersecurity bell curve aims to show how still basic security hygiene protects against 98% of attacks. That's right, 98% of attacks. So we need to make sure that we are doing the basics. And they are enable MFA. We really want to make it harder for the bad actors to get started in the first place. Apply least privileged access. Prevent those that have credentials from doing damage by limiting access by using just-in-time techniques or just enough access, and then using risk-based adaptive policies on top of that. Keep up to date. We've been saying this for years. Patch, patch, patch. So many things are preventable. So we want to prevent those software vulnerabilities by keeping that infrastructure up to date. Utilize anti-malware. This stops the code execution on those endpoints and devices. And then finally, protect your sensitive data. Implement information protection, such as data loss prevention policies, sensitivity labels, so that even in the event of a breach, we know where that sensitive data is and that we can do something about it. Passing back over to you now, Mark.
Thanks very much for that, Ali. That was great. And my name is Mike Jones, and I'm here to talk to you about obviously zero trust and building a roadmap around how to move to zero trust and possibly away from the older perimeter ideology, and also about then ongoing, how do you support that? What services can you build around that to make sure that you're constantly validating the effectiveness of your security and always pushing that forward to improve. So obviously Ali's gone over the tenets of zero trust, being assume breach, use least privilege access, and verify explicitly. I'm not going to really explain what it is. I'll just talk more about how we apply that to kind of your environment. So we're always trying to design with the idea in mind that your environment can and will be hacked. And we want to reduce how an attacker can move around your environment, want to reduce the damage they can do if they're able to breach your environment. And it takes a long time, basically. It's very difficult. A lot of companies are moving from these environments that are, pre-lockdown. They have on-premises infrastructure, VPNs, old infrastructure, and they have trust in that network, basically. And it's difficult to move away from that. It's not an overnight exercise. And there's a certain cadence to how you move into zero trust and a certain order of how you should take those actions, which we'll talk through more in the next slide. So obviously the main solutions we're talking around are really Microsoft 365 and the Microsoft Defender suite, including Defender for Cloud. We also make use of Microsoft Sentinel as our SIM and for all our security automation. And we find most organizations are using Microsoft 365. In fact, a lot of organizations we talk to have the fully 5 licensing, the top tier of licensing that gives them all the security and compliance capabilities and features. But they're not always making best use of them, or they're not aware that they have certain components of that licensing that could be better leveraged. So what we'll do with those customers is we'll work with them to build a project roadmap on how they can roll out those features. And we'll base that around the technical dependencies. Obviously, the first actions in that roadmap are going to support the later actions. There's going to be some quick wins. So there's some technology we can very quickly roll out. There's not a huge amount that needs to be done to put it in place, and it will measurably improve the security of an organization. So we can factor that in early on. Obviously, I talked about technical dependencies, things like making sure mail was in Exchange Online, files are in OneDrive, or file shares are moved to SharePoint. Things like this will greatly support moving to zero trust, and obviously making sure that we spend the time before doing that to make sure that the environment we're moving to, that Microsoft 365 environment, is configured to best practice, and it's secure and has a compliance framework built around it, so that we're going to support the growth of these services in a secure way, which is how we earn the trust of the organization's employees. We can also take on the business concerns of the organization we're talking to. What are the security risks of your organization? And we can factor that into what technologies we recommend or how we roll them out. And we can also tie in, the ending of third-party contracts or products you're tied into. We can build that into the roadmap and kind of align where we move from certain technologies based on when those contracts end. For example, you might have a Mimecast that runs out in May, so we could look to move to Defender for Office 365, ahead of that time and gain some confidence before that contract runs out, things like that. There's also another webinar course running soon, which is Microsoft 365 implementation, roadmap best practices. And I think this is going to cover the whole of Microsoft 365 and rolling out that roadmap, moving to autopilot, integrating with Azure AD, removing that dependency on a VPN, and moving further into the cloud, making sure you do that in a secure and productive way. That webinar is going to be on the 6th of April at 2 to 3 p.m. and that's going to be hosted by 2 of my colleagues Joe Cato and Jason Lee, who are excellent, so worthwhile attending. You can sign up to that one through our website. And this is a kind of an indicative example of an implementation roadmap, where we obviously have 3 different streams for productivity, compliance, and security. And we're rolling out those features in line with Zero Trust, and we can move an organization from being from those first fundamental foundational steps that Ali talked about. We talked about patching, we talked about MFA, we talked about user education. Those things we can kind of handle foundation at the start, and then we can quickly build on top of that. So, for example, in compliance, we're starting with the starter and leaver process, making sure we can automate that if possible, making sure the authority for the starter and leaver process is a HR system, not a manual process that IT have to do. We're going to really improve the starter leaver process. We're going to build our labels and our classifications, which will support the rest of our compliance journey. In terms of security, we're going to roll out what I'd consider the basic features: MFA, conditional access. We're going to stop legacy authentication, and we're going to try and integrate as many applications as we can with Azure Active Directory. Really, when we move to the cloud, conditional access becomes kind of our gateway into that environment. And we can do a lot more with conditional access than we can do with like a traditional VPN. We can put restrictions on place. And I think Ali touched on this as well in her section, where we talked about dynamic device risk. We can consider the health of the device. We can consider the patching state of the device. We can consider the risk associated with the user or with that sign-in. And we can even take it so far as to say that we can put restrictions in place on unmanaged devices. So if someone accesses company data from an unmanaged device, we could say perhaps that they're not allowed to download anything or view any attachments in their email, for example. And then next we have, above that, we have Microsoft Sentinel. And we recommend rolling this out quite early in the implementation roadmap, because Sentinel, obviously as a SIM, is going to collect all the security incidents and information for the organization, as we going to become the authoritative source of security information for that organization. And as we build out all the rest of the features, we're going to plug them into Sentinel. There's very good efficiencies with using Sentinel with Microsoft features. They work very well together, as you'd expect, and they're very easy to set up and integrate. So we can kind of, all the other features we've got out, we can kind of keep an eye on that through Sentinel. And really, we're going to go all the way up to moving to passwordless. Obviously, there's no, Ali mentioned in her chat that you can buy 1,000 verified credentials for $1. Obviously, passwords are bad and the credentials are a weakness. So we'll support you moving to passwordless, moving to Windows Hello for Business, and reducing your reliance on having credentials, and obviously all the phishing protection that comes from getting rid of those credentials. And we'll really go all the way up to endpoint DLP, insider risk management, and making sure we're making dynamic decisions on who should have access into an environment. Thanks, Lisa. So to talk about our XDR SIM and store services, we've talked about the implementation, the roadmap. We've talked about rolling out all these features in line with best practice, but how can you ensure that your cybersecurity capabilities are working to defend your organization's data as best as they can? We obviously love a stat here at Chorus. We've gone over a few already. I'm going to add another one to the mix, which I think is around 80% of breaches are caused by misconfigurations that are against an organization's policy anyway. So we need to make sure that we're not just rolling out these features, we're keeping an eye on them, making sure that the configuration is good, and making sure that we're putting effort into the areas where effort should be placed. And really, we provide MDR services to cover those requirements. Microsoft 365 is a secure platform. It's a very good platform, but there are also some risks associated with Microsoft 365. And with moving to any public cloud, and we can use our MDR services to protect from those. So really the way this works is we obviously deploy the Defender tool sets. We deploy Defender for Cloud, which has some kind of posture management. It can tell us when resources move out of their best, most secure configuration. And we hook that up to Sentinel, and we can obviously take on other on-premise data sources and any other products that are important to an organization's security outcomes. And next, we're going to talk about our managed XDR and MDR services. So broadly, we have 3 services. We have MDR for endpoints, which covers the endpoints. We have XDR for cloud, which kind of covers the whole cloud environment, Microsoft 365 environment. And then we have XDR for hybrid, which covers basically all of that and any on-premises data sources. XDR for hybrid is where we're aiming for really full coverage. So what do you do? Basically, you've rolled out all these features, you've put them in place, or you're in the process of rolling them out. Implementation is only one piece of security. We need to make sure that they stay in good configuration, and we need to make sure that someone's looking after those tools and someone's responding to what those tools tell us, basically. And we need to make sure that, we're keeping up to date with our patching and all the other foundational steps of cybersecurity. And this is really where our MDR services come into place. Most companies are looking to either build their own SOC capabilities, or they're looking to partner with someone else to build SOC capabilities. And really, the decision around that is based on, Lisa, do you want to, yeah, is based on firstly skills. It's very difficult to recruit in cybersecurity. There's less people with the required skills than there are positions we need them for, and obviously driving a high value at the moment, which is difficult. Chorus have an advantage. We can recruit basically with some of the universities we work with, and we have kind of well-defined career paths for the analysts to follow. So we're really keen on investing in those people and improving their capabilities and training them up and retaining them for as long as possible. It's also quite expensive. It's heavy in cost to build your own SOC. And also when you build that SOC, you're not going to have a very mature SOC. It's going to take a while to really build out the maturity of your capabilities in your own SOC. Or, you can partner with us or another MSSP, and we can put them in place very quickly for you and cover all the avenues of attack that you'd be concerned about. Capacity, again, a lot of times we see organizations make the similar mistakes where they'll configure these tools, they'll deploy the security tools, and they'll just set up email notifications to go into an infrastructure team or a support team that's already kind of overstretched. And you hear examples of this happening all the time where a company is hit by ransomware. The alerts, the tools work, they're alerting the teams, but the IT teams that are getting alerted are too overburdened to have the time to get to those tickets or those emails and respond in time. And I also think it's worth highlighting the fact that security and infrastructure are kind of 2 different distinct skill sets. And this is something I see. In security, we often consider if we find evidence of a breach, the best practice is not really to do anything until we really understand the full scope of the breach. And then we want to take action when we understand the full picture, rather than just making a knee-jerk reaction like isolating a single endpoint when, for example, we don't know if a defender's on multiple endpoints. The danger with that is obviously if we isolate one endpoint and take action in a knee-jerk way to an attack, then we're basically telling that attacker that we know that they're there, and we know where they are, and we're kind of giving them clues, and they're just going to change the way they're attacking the organization. So it's very important to make sure that you have the right skills to cope with those threats, and you have people who are going to follow the correct processes. And even the processes themselves is something that it's going to take a long time to build up if you try and do this yourself, or you can use our expertise. And scale, obviously, the ability to rapidly scale and stay ahead of threats. We offer 24/7 support. We are constantly looking at emerging news, emerging threats, For example, if there's a new vulnerability or something that requires out-of-band action, for example, Log4j, we sent an advisory on the Sunday to all our customers, and then we're kind of every morning we'll very quickly deploy detections to find Log4j abuse, but then every morning we're kind of having that war room. What do we know today that we didn't know yesterday, and how can we improve our detections? So talking over those services, obviously I've mentioned them already briefly, but just to cover it and what they contain. We have MDR for endpoints, which covers endpoints only. And Marcus, I think at the start of this call, talked about a statistic, which was 70% of breaches originate from endpoints. So obviously endpoint is a great place to have coverage. We also offer XDR for cloud, where we kind of cover Microsoft 365, Office 365 and Azure. And we have a very complete and full coverage of those tool sets, basically using those tools. And we're also introducing all the advanced capabilities that you'd expect from a mature SOC. And then we have XDR for hybrid, which is basically all of that, but we're also bringing in on-premises sources. And we're really trying to achieve full coverage of your environment, or the best possible coverage of your environment. So we have detections in every area. And this is all basically underpinned by Microsoft Sentinel. So what's included? Obviously, we have 24/7 cybersecurity operations center, and we have various levels of service. And I mentioned our emerging threat protection, as in a process around any emerging threats. And that's quickly giving you the what's happened, what do you need to do, how do you do it kind of advice to your support team. We also work with threat intelligence, so we're taking in threat intelligence from a variety of different sources. We're a member of the NCSC's Cybersecurity Information Sharing Partnership, or CISP, so we get threat intelligence from a variety of places, including Microsoft in a lot of times. And where we have high confidence in that threat intelligence, we can make early decisions. When we receive that threat intelligence, for example, we can push that threat intelligence into block lists in conditional access, block lists in firewalls on premise. We can also use our automation to push those indicators of compromises to Defender for endpoint, and we can say, if you see these files, if you try to connect to these URLs or these IP addresses, block it and alert us to let us know it's happened. So we can make better use of our threat intelligence. We also are constantly releasing new content, new detection rules. I mean, in the last couple of days, obviously we've been looking at the Hermetic Wiper malware and all the new malware and 0 days that are coming out due to the obviously situation in Ukraine. We're also offering threat hunting and vulnerability management. So for what we can't detect, we're going to threat hunt, and we're also giving you threat and vulnerability management information every week based on what needs to be patched and how you can improve the security posture of your organization. And kind of all of this is kind of encompassed by the service governance. So every month we have service governance meetings, and we're aiming to kind of be a transformative security partner. It's important to us that we're providing value to your organization. We're integrating with your organization as you would expect your own SOC. If you hired your own SOC, we want to fulfill the same role. So what's important to you and your organization is also going to be important to us. So we therefore offer custom detections. We'll build custom detections for you. If there is bespoke automation you'd like us to build, we have basically 3 full-time developers that we can give that work to. And it's all underpinned by this kind of service governance, where we're really scoping those conversations around how can we implement these recommendations, how can we improve your security posture, and we can use all the metrics that Microsoft have very kindly given to us. So there are secure scores for identity, secure scores for apps, secure scores for devices, there's exposure scores for devices, and we can take all of those scores to keep track of our security posture and making sure we're improving over time. And we also use the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So for every detection we have, we're also kind of mapping that to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which for those of you who are not familiar with the MITRE ATT&CK framework, it's kind of a framework of all of the kill chain that an attacker would take, and all the kind of tactics, techniques and procedures an exhaustive list of all the TTPs that they might use, and we'll put our detections against that framework. And what we can do for a customer is we can tag each detection with the attack framework reference, and we can very quickly build heat maps against the MITRE attack framework. So when we have these service governance meetings once a month, and we can have very targeted conversations around where we see gaps in defense, and we can also test that. So for organizations, we can do adversary emulation, and we can, we've talked about 80% of breaches caused by misconfigurations. We can make sure that our defenses are working as well as they should do by engaging in adversary emulation, basically, which is where we use a test workstation to run some of these TTPs. For example, running PowerShell commands on a non-standard port, or trying to move RDP to a different port would be good examples of tests that we can take that would test TTPs and our detections. So we can be very targeted when we talk to customers about where we're spending time and where they need to improve. And we also include phishing simulation every month, so we can do attack simulation through the tools, and we're helping with that foundational user education element where we're keeping users aware of cybersecurity risks. And kind of all of this is underpinned by a very streamlined service transition process. So we have a very on rails way to transition into our service. Technically, it's very quick. The service side to that is very well documented and easy to understand. And then to talk a little bit about the technical architecture then. So this graphic kind of explains the technical architecture from a very high level. We have our Cybersecurity Operations Center. All our analysts are based in the UK, and they all have access to our management instance. You can see the core CSOC Microsoft Sentinel is our management instance at the top. And this contains basically all of our threat intelligence, all of our automation, all of the playbooks and processes and workbooks we've built, all live in that management instance. And we can very quickly and easily connect a customer to our management instance through Azure Lighthouse. So you can find Chorus's security offerings in Azure itself. If you go to Azure Marketplace and search for Chorus, you'll find our offerings. It's very quick to delegate Azure Lighthouse access to your Sentinel environment. And we ask for Sentinel access and Defender for Cloud Access, or what used to be called Azure Security Center. And we can manage it from that environment. And the advantage is all the automation that we have, we can then use against your environment. All the tables that we have in our environment, we can use against your environment. So for example, I've mentioned threat intelligence. We don't need to bring that into your environment or set up a lot of processes around that. It exists in our environment, and we can compare the tables in your environment to the tables in our environment, as well as obviously giving the analysts all of those pieces of automation to work with, and all of the automated responses we build. So we've obviously got MDR for endpoint. We're hooking Defender for endpoint up to Microsoft Sentinel, using Lighthouse to delegate access to that. And for XDR for cloud or hybrid, we're obviously taking in a wider range of logs. If we skip to the next slide. And then to talk about the service process then, to kind of tie this all together. We talked about the technical and Lighthouse. I think just to add to the technical piece, I would mention that we have, for our automation, we have some app registrations that we'd ask you to consent to give us access to run our automation in your environment. And we've also built it in a very quick to onboard and scalable way. So you delegate access to your Sentinel environment or to a resource group that doesn't contain Sentinel. We have Sentinel as code in our environment, so we can push it out, or we can work with a Sentinel instance you perhaps already have. We're going to ask you to obviously delegate that through Lighthouse, consent to our app registrations, and then we use something called Azure AD, identity governance, features that are built into the tools essentially, to delegate analyst access if they need access into a portal. And then around the service, obviously, hopefully you can see this okay, but we've kind of divvied out the responsibilities of the customer and the CSOC, and what both parties are responsible for. So we can kind of talk through this diagram from a high level. The customer, really we're taking all the data and the logs and the APIs where we have deployed detections to their environment. We're offering that bottom 24/7 fundamental monitoring and threat detection, responding to any alerts and incidents that are raised in their environment, proactively looking for threats in their environment, and obviously feeding in that proactive threat intelligence and making decisions on that threat intelligence ahead of something bad happening. We have automated investigation and automated triage. We have tools to help the analysts investigate and respond as quickly as they can. And basically, if nothing's required from you, then we won't let you know. We'll close that down in Sentinel as a false positive. And we're not going to waste your time, basically. We're going to take that time off you. If there is some action that's required, or if we've taken a response action like isolating the machine or restricting app execution, or perhaps resetting a user's credentials who we can see are having logins that they shouldn't, then we'll escalate that to you. And that escalation can come in the form of either a direct integration with your ITSM platform, or it could be an email with a call. Whatever you like, we can build for you. We have a customer API basically that we've built, and the way that we escalate to you is kind of built into that back end automation. So whether it's an integration with an ITSM platform or an email, the analysts are going to escalate that to you in the same way, basically straight from the platform, and they'll basically let you know if something needs more information or further action, or if we've taken action. And then that's all pinned around, as I said, those monthly service governance meetings where we're talking over obviously the SLAs and making sure we're responding in the fastest way possible, but also talking about that transformative roadmap. How can we implement the recommendations we're giving you? How can we improve our detection and our capabilities to give you the best cybersecurity measures possible? And that takes me to the end of my section. Are there any questions? I'm going to hand back to Marcus.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think that was brilliant. As Mark mentions, before we close, Lisa, are there any questions that have been shared, or does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask?
Thanks, Marcus. Yes, I've got a couple of here. One which says, what does the typical onboarding process look like? I know Mark touched upon transition, but I guess the question, yes, what does the typical onboarding process look like?
Yeah, okay. So I think technically I've probably answered that question pretty well in terms of, Sentinel, Azure Lighthouse, consent to the app registrations for the automation. I'd say from a service side, I've not touched on as much. So to talk about that a bit more, we're really looking to integrate with your support function. So we spend a lot of time basically making sure in transition that we have that right, that we're escalating in the correct way, that we're being useful. We don't want to overburden any support teams. We want to give them good, actionable advice. So we spend a lot of time in transition, making sure that's ready, and meeting the pre-agreed configuration, I guess. Like we'll have a design in mind when we start with the customer. The transition process is going to make sure that we get to their desired configuration in a timely manner where we can offer them the best service.
Great. I've just got a question about, will the slides be available after the call? And I just want to confirm that all slides in the recording will be sent to everyone later today, or if not tomorrow, so they will be available. I've got another question here. Do you outsource any of your CSOC operations? No. All of our CSOC operations, we've hired all the analysts ourselves. They're all UK based. There's no on-call phone or anything like that. It is 24/7 7 staff. Brilliant, thank you. And just one last question that I've got come in is, what are the base level licensing requirements? I'm sure I can take that one. I'd say Defender for Endpoint is kind of a fundamental for our MDR for Endpoint service. I'd say that our XDR for Cloud offering is really aimed at kind of those E5 customers. But obviously you can have components of it, and then obviously XDR for hybrid
typically our customers do have heavy investment in Microsoft licensing. That's really why they work with us. But we can, we use Microsoft as a tool set. It doesn't necessarily have to be what you have in your environment. So even if you don't have E5 licensing, but you want to use the service, we can still build a bespoke Sentinel instance for you and make sure we're meeting your security requirements and achieving your security outcomes.
Thanks, Mark. Got just a few more coming in here. Typically, how long does the onboarding process take?
I'd say technically, if we're talking about MDR for endpoint and XDR for cloud, I'd say the technical onboarding is really normally done in about an hour call. In terms of what we need to do to start supporting your environment, it normally takes about an hour. It's very quick, and it's been built that way. Obviously, all of our customers use a very similar tool set. So whereas kind of traditional SIM providers would insist on kind of a baseline period and a tuning period, if all our customers broadly use the same core tools, security tools, then there's a good deal of tuning that we've already got kind of done out of the box. So we can kind of make use of that. I'd say the service side transition takes a little bit longer. That's normally going to take a few calls, and it's going to happen over the course of a couple of weeks. But really, in terms of like offering you technical 24/7 coverage, we can do that within an hour. For XDR hybrid, where it's kind of bespoke to each customer, it depends. Typically, we normally have to deploy like a log collector or several log collectors for a customer, which we'll work together with the customer to do. There might be some other integrations that we suggest, which will require some development time. So it could take longer in those occasions, but the core, protection can be put in place very, very quickly.
Brilliant, thanks. And then another question here: do you work with an existing CSOC or as an augmentation?
We can work in several ways. So we're basically a standalone CSOC. You can outsource the whole SOC function of your organization to us, but you can also use us for like hybrid CSOC. So if you have coverage for the daytime but need like night shift coverage, then we can do that in hybrid CSOC. And we also have some very large organizations who partner with us, really for us to give them a steer on the automation and the SOAR side of things.
Brilliant, thank you. I've got a few more coming in, but I'm just quite conscious of time. Marcus, I'm not sure if you'd like to wrap up, and then any questions that we haven't been able to respond to, we can answer during follow-ups.
Yeah, no problem at all. No worries. In that case, I hope everyone found the session provided valuable insight. If you do wish to discuss the topics we covered today in a bit more detail, then please feel free to contact us directly. We're happy to book a more bespoke session for you. If you just contact us at hello@chorus.co, and that would be great. But thank you all for joining.